All right. Welcome, Karen. I'm so glad to have you.
I'm so excited to be here.
All right. Can you introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Karen Chalmers. I'm the VP of Marketing and Partnerships at Interval. We are a SaaS that provides business valuation services for the purposes of accounting firms and banks and wealth managers to help small business owners understand the value of their business and what they can do to grow it over time instead of just looking at evaluation at the end of the story. So we're based out of Canada, and we're really here to help democratize valuation for small businesses.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating because, like you mentioned, a lot of people can't really figure out what the value of their business is until they're ready to sell or, all of that. So I think I'm so glad that a business like yours exists where you can get that information on an ongoing basis. And I know we spoke previously about potentially helping founders understand like retirement options and all of that. So that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Mm.
it's something that we really believe in, and I think that this actually, as we're talking about thought leadership today, I think this is going to lend into a little bit of, the why behind a business and how we're going to explore that for, how we do it at Interval and how others can do it as well.
Awesome, awesome. So yes, let's talk about thought leadership. Oftentimes founders feel like, why should I get into thought leadership? I'm not marketing, especially if they're not marketing, right? They're just kind of like, why should I'd rather just be invisible. And yeah, I'm a founder. What do you think are the strategic risks there where the founders decide to be invisible?
Oh, well, okay. So we're going to go back to the why, right? When
Hmm.
founders stay invisible, the whole market misses the why behind the company, right? When you lose that emotional kind of conviction, the context, the clarity, it can't be replicated by anybody else besides the founder. You can't do that really in like a brochure or a deck. It's just, it's not a branding risk. And I think the buyers of your product and partners, or even people who you are trying to bring on as talent, they want to see that kind of truth, the why behind your organization. And it's not a risk at all. I don't see it. But I've seen startups with really, really brilliant technology, and I've worked with a lot of startups over the years. They kind of lose their traction because the founder didn't like they didn't claim the microphone. They didn't take ownership of their story and their why and talk about it really publicly. And sometimes competitors could they may have less substance to their product, but they've got stronger storytelling, and so they would gain market share. And I think the thing is that they gained that market share because they were visible, but not necessarily better. And so when you don't, kind of lean into visibility, you risk, talent skipping over you because they didn't feel your mission, or they risk, other vendors working with you because they don't feel your mission, or people who are going to invest in you. And you also risk being interpreted by others, right? So like other people are just going to interpret what they do as opposed what you do instead of the founder stating it from their center and their emotional core, what you do and why. So you need to define that narrative for yourself. And I think founder invisibility is just one of those, you know, vacuums. Like if you don't do it, then other people are going to tell the story for you, right? So I think it's a real risk if you're not telling your own story.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Someone watching this might say, "Okay, that sounds interesting. You're using a new phrase, thought leadership. It's what we've always talked about, personal branding, and it's not important to me right now. I need to focus on business metrics." So, if someone is saying that, how can we help them to understand that thought leadership is actually a business discipline?
Well, I mean, it absolutely is. I will go heavily on record saying that. But I think one of the things is that, like, I think a lot of people kind of get thought leadership mixed up with like ego and kind of maybe like, well, I only if I'm going to be talking a talking head on LinkedIn, then that's basically like Instagram. And it's like, no, it doesn't, it's not that. And I think that that's kind of maybe where some people kind of feel uncomfortable about it. Um, like looking at this as like a strategic tool. It's about market education. It's about shaping the category that you're in, because sometimes, I mean, a lot of times, ideally, you're shaping a new category. Isn't that wonderful if you can do that? And it's about trust acceleration, right? People trust other people, not just the logos. So we need our founders not to perform, but we need them to teach and open up the playbook that they're proposing to clients. And so when you kind of shift from this thought idea of like, I'm going to be a talking head on Instagram, no, you're shifting from like engagement, which could be what they're imagining, to impact, because the audience that is watching your videos, like they want to know that you're not, rehearsed and self-congratulatory, but you're leading. It's not performative branding at all. It's about being inspirational on cue, right? This is the business function part of it, right? So when we start to think about, you know, um, actually creating processes and you know, timelines and content structures around thought leadership, it kind of lives on this roadmap now, and it can be measurable. And, at Interval, we treat it as a shared resource. The revenue team, everybody on the revenue team. So our revenue team is marketing, sales, customer success. Our founders sit within that wheelhouse as well, because we're all contributing to revenue. And because we all contribute to revenue, we all contribute to thought leadership and the insights from the field. So it's not just founders, it can be your executives who help step in and articulate what's coming next. It can be from your head of customer success, who kind of sees what's in the field and what's resonating and how you know it's connecting with the audience. So there's lots of different ways you can measure it, and we can talk about that a bit more, but also kind of how we're looking at it as a business discipline and not just like talking heads on Instagram. It's just a different beast.
I really like that idea. And I like that you mentioned it's not just about the co-founders or certain groups of people, it's the revenue team. So, can you talk us through what that looks like so that people don't start to have like content fatigue, everyone sharing the same things? Like, what does it really look like when the leadership is creating thought leadership that also comes back to the organization?
Yeah, I mean, so the way we like to look at it is it's kind of like an editorial roundtable, not a content factory, right? Like I don't need to have our CEO write so many social media posts a day, but we want to make sure that we're kind of working on a schedule of some sort still. So we work in monthly sprints, as I like to call them, and we kind of build our content to suit it. So our founders will speak to the vision and the origin story of our organization, and then where the market's going. And then our C-level and VP, they kind of VPs, we all bring that kind of real operational clarity, like, what's actually working, the stats to back it up. And then the revenue team, like I said earlier, they're bringing in the audience lens, right? Like, what do people actually want to hear, and what will move them from passive scrollers to active listeners or participants in the conversation. And to avoid burnout, we repurpose opportunities, right? Like that's, I think, marketing 101 in some ways. But if marketing is creating a PR opportunity for the CEO to be on a podcast, then we repurpose those appearances. and they become like internal enablements for sales or content for a blog or social media content or even newsletter content, right? So those kind of moments, and podcast is a great one to really step into thought leadership too. Like it just doesn't have to be, I'm going to write on LinkedIn 6 times a week and talk about my ideas as a leader. It can be, I'm going to get a speaking engagement at a conference that I really want to be at. So, maybe the marketing team helps build those PR relationships, or getting into podcasts. And so many people, and there are so many niche podcasts now that you can find podcasts that you can engage with. And then when you get into podcasts, you take that content, you repurpose it, make it more social content, tag the leaders, make sure that they're all good. And those snippets become kind of carousels on LinkedIn or whatever. And we're not asking, like, I'm not asking our executives to write something for a newsletter every week, right? Like, that's where the burnout can really come in. But I do ask them to write something for me once a month. When the, inspiration hits them, when they have a little bit of time, just to write something down. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want it in their zone of genius, right? So if we have our CFO, obviously, when we're talking to accountants and wealth managers, our CFO has a very kind of aligned story with them. So I want him to be bringing his genius to the table and writing about it. And then, yeah, marketing will adapt and edit and whatnot, but we'll also amplify the content across multiple, pillars. So we're all working together as this like collaborative team, because really we all win in the end, right? Marketing's job is easier when everybody's working together. Revenue, the whole revenue team cares because sales is easier when we're all working. And then of course the founders, well, they care because the bottom line gets better.
Mm, that makes so much sense. It almost feels like this should be common sense.
Hopefully one day, right?
Right, right. You mentioned the marketing team editing things, and
Mhm.
I find like it can be such an interesting conversation because oftentimes non-marketers are so scared of putting things out there, and so they really want marketers to help with editing. But on the other hand, if we edit too much, we take out that edge, we take out that the uniqueness of what they're saying. So how do you kind of balance that out?
I mean, I think I like to look at it like optimizing their voice, making sure that their true voice is still there, and then kind of edit from that point. Because raw content, it definitely has its own rhythm, right? Founders, they're a little staccato with their rants and analogies, but it feels real when they do that, right? So we're trying not to polish it into oblivion. We don't want it to be shiny, but making sure that it's, translatable, carries further, maybe non-offensive, depending on where your brand wants to be. Sometimes offensive might work for your brand. But when we approached this problem of engaging the whole team as thought leaders, we started with brand pillars, right? Here are, and then we reviewed them with the entire team and we educated them on how to use it. And then we created kind of like voice documents for our co-founders, right? So making sure that we wanted to guide them a little bit in the direction of where we wanted them to go, but without, putting them in handcuffs. And these are all internal documents, but they break down tone and cadence and even some of the quirks that we want to keep in there. And then when we're reviewing their content, we have this kind of guideline to say, hey, you know, keep this line in because it's weird and punchy like you are, right? Or you know, um, keep that raw edge in. And as marketers, we can use this document to help us maintain a little bit of healthy fear, I suppose. And that discomfort that comes from us wanting to polish everything perfect. And because the ones that are uncomfortable probably hit better, really, that vulnerability, it it has the ability to travel, right? And then ideally you get some viral moments, but that's not likely, right? The likelihood of virality is just not likely. So consistency and kind of keeping it at the rhythm and keeping it to their voice, that's what matters.
Yes, keeping it to their voice. That's such a good point. And it just feels like thought leadership is, it's a long game. It's not just let's do this in the next 30 days and hopefully we win a bajillion dollars. So, how do you think about it, an evolving thought leadership from seed stage and scale or whatever people decide, but as the organization keeps growing, how do you think about evolving thought leadership?
Yeah, I mean, it's a building a tower from a good foundation, right? So, one way that I actually have looked at it from a KPI standpoint is like, are you actually posting? Are you creating, are you joining into the conversation? And so I actually have everybody in our revenue team every month give me their follower count and their connection count, right? Just to make sure, because I mean, if you're actually engaging in this is on LinkedIn, if you're engaging on the LinkedIn platform, that's naturally going to grow as you're engaging more. So it's just a way to keep them kind of focused on going back to LinkedIn, because Karen's going to ask them for a number at the end of the month. And it's not, I'm not coming in with a stick or anything like that, but it's just, what gets measured gets done, right? So that's one way of kind of looking at like, how do we actually build a system that evolves as it grows? Well, ideally, you're seeing that growth in connections and follower count. And I'm not logging into their LinkedIn to look for it. They just have to throw two numbers on a spreadsheet once a month for me. It's really simple. But when we're looking at like, how do we take that foundation and grow it? So like when you're in your early stage, your job is to provoke, right? Challenge assumptions, ask dangerous questions. Like look at the questions that you probably asked as you were building your product or service and start with those, because you ask those questions to challenge what was the status quo already, right? And then as you start to grow, you shift towards more proof, right? So showing case studies or early testimonials, early wins, customer insights. And then when you start to scale, you get the right to be able to predict and be more kind of um, showing like this is where we're heading, this is how we're changing the industry we're in, and actually leading the charge. So, for a narrative arc at Interval, say for instance, like one of our early arcs is like, why do 98% of business owners not know their worth? And so we were kind of like, why is that? What's wrong with our system that you don't know that number as a business owner? And now we've moved into teaching advisors and the business owners how to operationalize that valuation, right? So it's not just a sales metric, like a sale metric when you're selling your business, but it's a health indicator. And so our content has shifted, but it's still stayed consistent with, you deserve to know that 98%, right? It's not like, why don't people know this? Well, that's why we built the tool. Now we're like, you deserve to know this information. And and then eventually, I mean, in my ideal world, it'll be the numbers are reversed. Only 2% don't know their valuation, right? So if we flip that on its head, that'll be great. But those are the, as we kind of move through our own journey as an organization, it's like, you want to challenge, you want to ask those dangerous questions, and then you start to grow and give your proof, and then push the boundary and say, like, this is where the industry is headed. And your founder should be the one leading that charge. Founders, executives, everybody.
Ooh, that's so good. And you made me think about, oh my goodness, I need to start tracking my follower accounts and connections on LinkedIn because you're right. If we don't track it, we don't even know if we're making progress or not. Yeah, we don't even know how to optimize. So that's really good. Okay, so now my question is, how do we know if we're doing too much thought leadership, and we're overwhelming people with our messaging, or too little and we're leaving a lot of money on the table? What would you say is a good way for us to figure that out?
I mean, KPIs and data, right? Like we can always go back to numbers, right? And you'll feel it, right? Like there's a point where you know, LinkedIn is great. They give you like a, hey, you're up or down with your, number of people and impressions and all that every week. So you'll start to see like, okay, if I'm overdoing it in this one area, maybe it's not really, it doesn't have the traction. Maybe I've leaned too heavily into this one topic. And maybe that it's time to switch gears. Or maybe your message is getting diluted over too many verticals, right? So if you're trying to go too big on your voice or your theme, maybe start to narrow in a little bit, which may be difficult if your ideal customer profile is broad, but maybe you target in on like one topic to really focus in on over a couple weeks and then shift in, right? Because if you're hearing things like, I love your content, but I'm not sure what you actually do, that's a red flag, right? So you want to be able to make sure that you're really kind of zoning in on what you do, or the problem you're trying to solve, or what connects with the buyer as a pain point. Because remember, like marketing, products, any organization, if you're not solving a pain point, then you're what are you doing, really? I guess it's really the big question, right? So making sure that you're targeting in on some of those pain points, or maybe showing that they could be pain points for a part of the segment, and maybe you don't need to talk to everybody every day. So that's one thing. And if you're and that might be like if you're overdoing it too, like you could also look at scaling back on like I said, we talk to banks, wealth managers, and accountants. So maybe I'm zoning my target in on banks this week, right? And making sure that like the bank people get a little bit of love for my content. And I will maybe talk to their pain point. And today maybe an accountant won't pay attention to my content. And that's okay. Like it's okay to say, this isn't for you. But when you're underdoing it, so altogether, like if you're not really connecting with anybody, or you're not doing it enough, you'll see that there'll be misconnections. You'll see that your impact is going down. You'll actually see it at the sales cycle too. So your sales conversations might take longer because your prospects haven't been properly primed, right? They haven't seen that the the story has been told to them in the way. So basically what we're trying to do is we're shortening the distance, right? From curiosity to conversion. So if there's a whole bunch of us in the organization all kind of telling a story that helps to get from curiosity to conversion quicker, that's when you're going to see that it's working. But if you're underdoing it, you'll notice that like people are like, oh, the sales team will be like, you know what, they're just not getting it. This part of our ICP is just not getting it. And then maybe you need to create more content for that ICP, part of that ICP, right? Like I can think of times where I've had conversations with our CRO and he'd be like, yeah, these type of customers are not understanding our why. And I'm like, okay, so I have to not only make the brand message more succinct for them, but also we collectively have to start to think about ways we can storytell better for them.
Oh, I like that feedback there. You're like, these types of people are not understanding why, and this can help us to shorten that conversation. So I want to understand, what does that kind of thought leadership look like? This high leverage thought leadership that bridges that the trust gap, the why gap, all of those things. What would you say that looks like?
Well, I would say sometimes it looks small but lands big. Um, maybe sometimes it's like, why did a deal fall through? Maybe a CEO will talk about that. They may not want to, but sometimes it's once again those uncomfortable conversations that keep it real. Or a candid breakdown from a success member about what didn't work for a customer and why and you have to get to the why you fixed it, right? You can't just say, yeah, this experience sucked, right? You have to kind of say like what we learned from it. Or maybe you bring to a keynote session language around an emerging pain in the market that nobody has named yet, right? So there's ways that you can kind of take these moments and shift the perception, and then that unlocks the trust, right? Because you're showing the reality of the situation and why you learned something more or how you're shifting the market. I mean, one of our best performing pieces, it wasn't flashy. It was just like a simple explanation about how traditional valuation models underserve small business owners. But it hit a nerve because it was true, it was clear, and it offered us as an alternative. And it was like short and succinct, like 300 words, little more than a tweet. But it had high impact. And that's the thing, right? High leverage and high impact per unit. So you really don't need to put tons and tons of effort if you're speaking from truth and you're speaking from clarity about the pain point that our customers are seeing. And so when you're doing all that, that unlocks trust. And it's usually like it's not always perfection. But when something like that hits, that's when you put a little bit of money behind it. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but this high performing one post, it was from our CEO. And I was like, hey, I'm going to throw a little bit behind it to boost it and I'm going to target it to the ICP that this is speaking to, because it's then going to not only elevate the CEO as a thought leader, but also showing that we are fixing the problem and shortening the gap and that pain cycle for the customer.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's like high leverage and high impact, and it doesn't have to be flashy because a lot of people think I need to spend a lot of money. I need to create a blockbuster video or something like that. So I'm glad that you use that example. So what do you think would change if a founder stops thinking about like, what do I need to post now? What do I need to post now? And more, they're thinking about what am I uniquely positioned to answer, or like a pain point that I can respond to, and maybe how can we help them get to that place?
I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful if every founder asked that question? Should I post? Or I would like to post, but I don't know what to post. And so, like, I think when we think about like framing this to a founder, it brings them back to their earned authority in the problem they are solving, right? The founder sits at that kind of crossroads of the product, the vision, product or service, the vision, and the market, because they've experienced something in their past that has made them want to do this organization in the first place, right? They've seen the mess that was out there and they're trying to solve for. So they've had those late night conversations with colleagues or peers in the past, and they've built it they've built whatever the organization is, the product, the service, under a set of constraints that nobody else has ever seen. So that's insight in itself, right? It's like, I'll use the example in which our founders built Interval. Basically, they ran a mergers and acquisition consultancy, and they would show up to people's homes at the last part of their sales or their business journey, and they were looking to sell. And they'd say, okay, well, this is how much your business is worth. And the business owner goes, what? I thought it was worth more than that. Right. So they lived that pain more than once. And so they realized that we had to make this valuation problem non-existent. So when you've actually lived through these types of painful moments yourself, you can bring that to the table and you can show your lived experience to people who need this problem solved as well. And so when you teach, when founders teach instead of, just kind of perform, they're activating the trust to people who are living this experience. And I mean, trust, it travels so much faster than branding or, spend or anything like that. I'd rather have like 10 posts that solve a pain that nobody else can explain than 1,000 posts that just chase, what the algorithm is doing today, right? The reality is that like the human beings that are behind all those posts on LinkedIn, behind every organization, behind every marketing message, those are the ones that people are actually going to trust. The voices of those people are the thing that is trustworthy. So just like kind of step out from behind the veil of like, I'm the brand, and be like, I'm the person, I'm the human behind this product, this experience. And when we tell those truthful stories, you kind of realize it doesn't have to be perfect, right? And that's, founders are probably always striving for perfection. And I kind of commend them for that. But get over it being perfect. Done is better than perfection.
Hmm. So you could say that again. Doesn't waste so much time trying to make things perfect and then things don't get done. So,
I
okay.
often say good enough. Good enough. 80-20 rule, right? Good enough.
I love that. I love that. So, ooh, we've covered a lot, Karen, like so much. And there's so many notes, so many like things that people can do. Now, for someone who's watching this and they're just kind of like, this is a lot to think about. But they've bought into the idea of thought leadership and they want to get into this quarter in the next couple of months. What would you say are some uncomfortable conversations they need to start having within their teams to prepare for thought leadership? Because you mentioned it's about being vulnerable, right? It's about saying something insightful, not necessarily what the algorithm wants. So, what would you say are some of the conversations they need to have?
I think there's a couple of things. Like, are you actually willing to make space for it on your team? Because it does take time, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you're going to be engaging in thought leadership activities, it will take time away from another thing on your plate. But is it worth it? And is it worth the risk? Um, and then I think beyond that, it's like you kind of have to just kind of agree to a set of rules. What are your pillars? What's your voice rules? And just say, okay, everybody, here's the 5 things that you're not allowed to talk about, or you you don't want to have give any trade secrets away or whatever, right? So like make up your list and say, okay, now go be vulnerable. And I would say like the idea of the vulnerability, it kind of it says to your executive team, like speaking before the perfect case study is written. Once again, good enough, right? Share that perspective before anybody else in the market does. That's the benefit of doing it. If you're just getting out there and being vulnerable, I mean, yeah, it's scary. And those high achievers in us, we want it to be perfect, but good enough and get it out there, right? Do it fast. Speed is so important in startup life because otherwise the alternative is irrelevance, right? If you're waiting till it's safe to speak, you're going to be echoing somebody else. Like you're going to be now using their language to describe the problem as opposed to your own. So that first, you know, um, that first thing that you're willing to fight for, that belief that you had starting this business, shout it and say it loud and really hold on to it tight, because that's your vision, that's your mission, right? Those are the things that hold your business as a solid foundation. Use it and then just play within the rules that you all agree on. And then create some sort of system to track it, because I mean, what gets measured gets done. I will say that until I'm blue in the face.
Oh my goodness. I feel like we could talk for another like 3 days and we will not be exhausted with all the stuff that we can learn about thought leadership. But I'll do people one better. What is the best way for them to connect with you? If they have more questions or they want to see thought leadership in action, or they want to find out more about the valuation process, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, you can come to our website, Interval, INTER hyphen VAL.ai, LinkedIn, and of course you can feel free to follow me and feel free to DM me on LinkedIn, because I love talking about this stuff. I love mentoring people on it. So yeah, that's where I am.
Wow, yes. Let's help to bring your stats up, your connection stats and your follower stats. Let's do it for Karen. Thank you so much, Karen. This has been such a great conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been great.